Loved ones, welcome back. It's Monday the 30th of March. This is our first official day back, not on campus, but we are back. We are resuming the spring semester. Since it's a Monday, boots and blue jeans. If it were Tuesday or Thursday, I'd have classes and I'd have to dress more appropriately, wouldn't I? But boots, blue jeans, and a dress shirt are gonna work for me today. So I want to tell you a short story, which will turn out to be the attendance verification for today's class. This is 4234. It's my intermediate entrepreneurship class, 2 sections. Today is session 25. We're going to be talking about chapter 11, which is a chapter on, largely a chapter on franchising. But before I get there, I want to tell you a story which I think has value. And I have to take you back to 1972. When I returned to the United States from Vietnam after a short leave, I was assigned to the United States Army Infantry School. And I taught there for about 17 weeks. I taught primarily land nav. In fact, I'm going to put something on the board I hadn't planned on. That is a pseudo-acronym, LORANS, L-O-R-A-N-S. When I say pseudo-acronym, it was an acronym for Long Range Area Navigational System. So when I returned from Vietnam, one of my service responsibilities outside of the classroom was to work on this LORANS thing, this Long Range Area Nav System. And I'm not an engineer. My role had to do with user interface. How do you take aerial imagery, aerial photographs, and interpret them in a map context? So that's what I did. And this was clearly only a military nav convention for many years, and it is what you now know as GPS, the Global Positioning System. And you thought I was low tech. But that's not the story I wanted to tell you. So I'm at Fort Benning. I'm teaching at the infantry school. I had broad responsibilities, but one of the courses that I taught was I taught land nav to a course in the Infantry Officers Advanced course. They were primarily captains and majors. They were career officers, and this would essentially be the equivalent of like an MBA if you were in a traditional post-secondary environment. So the IOAC program was probably 9 or 10 months in duration. It was intensive, and one of the things that was a delight is I didn't just teach American officers. I taught officers from 55 allied nations. I taught officers from all over the United Kingdom and South America and other places in the world. And we were often, sometimes we had field exercises, sometimes we were in a classroom setting. So one day we were in a classroom setting. I was teaching one of these classes to the IOAC students, and when we broke for lunch, there was an Israeli officer in the class. I don't recognize the insignia, so I couldn't tell you what his rank was, but he would have been the equivalent of a captain or a major for us. And 1972 was an election year in the United States. And of course, you know the sort of craziness that goes on with election years, with campaigning and finger pointing and all the stupid stuff that goes on. And he said to me over lunch, we happened to sit next to each other over lunch in this classroom sort of a setting. And he said to me over lunch, he said, we have to take our elections much more seriously than you Americans do. And I knew there was a fun message in that, so I said, please continue. And he said to me, he said, we elect a prime minister, that is our chief executive officer, just as y'all elect a president. He didn't say y'all. I don't think he was from southern Israel, but I'm just guessing, I don't know. So he said that we elect a PM, a prime minister, and he said, this is what fascinates me. He said, for us to consider anyone as a candidate, not to choose you, but just to consider you as a candidate, we look at you across 3 dimensions. Do you have any experience in the military? Have you ever served? Do you have any experience or knowledge or awareness in foreign policy? Very important if you're Israel. Have you ever successfully run a large organization? And he said, of course, if you we're comfortable if you only score high on 2 of those criteria, but you must. You must score high on 2 of those 3 criteria, or we wouldn't even consider you as a candidate. Well, I hold the Israelis in pretty high regard. I did then and I do now. And I thought that was kind of a fascinating story. And actually, that's one of the things, in my view, this is me going down a side street, that's one of the things that is a fundamental problem in the American university system. We typically almost always have professors as our presidents. And when I first got here, we had Bruce Gruby. He was a psychologist. I'm sure he knew a great deal about individual behavior. And he was followed by Brooks Keel, reproductive medicine. I guess you know a lot about the birds and the bees. Then we had a statistician, Jamie Hebert, and he was probably really, really good at probability estimates. And now we have a musician, Kyle Marrero. All wonderful men, but they wouldn't make the cut in Israel, would they? Wouldn't make the cut in Israel. So let me get back on task. When I say back on task, I want to talk to you all about chapter 13. Again, it's a chapter that focuses largely on franchising. And the truth is, as I prepared for this presentation, I really only have 2 concepts that I want to talk to you about. I want to talk to you about some fundamental pieces of franchising, and then I want to talk to you about what the authors call a primary target audience. There are several really insightful contributions that they make. So let me talk to you about franchising first. The thing that makes franchising so significant to people who are aspiring entrepreneurs is it is a classic growth strategy. Nobody can ever launch a business as a franchise because you have to demonstrate that the concept is successful. But there are several attributes that make a concept franchisable. And the point is, if you can build a system that supports a franchise network, then you have the opportunity literally to use other people's money to grow your business in truly significant ways, even intercontinentally, not just regionally or across the United States, but even on other continents. So if you could do that, if you can grow a business big, that's what venture capitalists call scaling. If you can scale a business up, if you can get bigger, farther, faster, that's what their BFF is. It's not best friends forever. But venture capitalists have their own take on BFF, bigger, faster, farther. And the point is that if you can scale a business up, you can truly generate wealth for yourself and for others. So franchising is enormously important from the perspective of entrepreneurs using it as a growth strategy. And I've seen data. In fact, franchising is studied pretty significantly in the marketing discipline for a lot of reasons. But I've seen data that suggests something like perhaps as many as 35% of the retail sales that take place in the United States take place in a franchised environment, whether it's a product-based franchised or whether it's a format-based franchised. So, let me tell you some of the attributes that the authors talk about here in chapter 11. And the first is, I want to start really with an observation that I make, and let me lose the Lorenz thing on the board. Goodness. I'm making this easy on myself. I put 2 contracted words on the board. ZOR is meant to stand for franchisor, and ZEE is meant to stand for franchisee. All I'm doing is simplifying this presentation, both board work and our conversation. So the point is, any franchise system relies on these 2 counterparties. The franchisor creates the system, the franchisee buys into it and operates businesses. So all franchised businesses have 2 counterparties, the franchisor and the franchisee. And I know that's no surprise. Now, as a general statement, all franchises will come in one of 2 flavors. They'll either be product-based franchises or they'll be format-based franchises. If, for example, I have a jewelry store here in the borough, and I'm not wearing a Rolex watch, I'm wearing an Omega, but if I got a franchise to sell Rolex watches, I can assure you that I'd be the only store in some some radius, some geographic area that had the franchise, the authority to sell Rolex watches. So that is a product-based franchise. J.C. Lewis here in Statesboro has a Ford dealership. That is another product-based franchise. So many franchises come in that form. They're product-based. But you know, too, that many franchises come in a form that's simply business format. You and I can walk into a McDonald's anywhere in the nation, and we know in advance what to expect. We have a reasonable sense for what the menu is going to be, what the pricing is, what the actual layout of the store is. It may have a Wi-Fi area, it may have a play place for kids, or the econ guys. Their parents take them in there often. If they've been good, and they can play and they scream and they get lost in all the stuff that's in there. It's just wonderful to watch, it really is. You gotta love an economist, because nobody else does. So all franchises are either product-based or business format. If I'm driving south on I-75 and I see a billboard that says next exit Holiday Inn Express, I know precisely what it's going to be like, don't I? Because all of the businesses in that franchise system follow the same format. They'll have the same room layout, the same amenities, the same features like free breakfasts and things like that. So that is simply the reality of franchising. Franchises are either product-based or they're business format-based, and that's a big deal. Now, what I want to put on the board, and there are only going to be 3 things on the board, and I'll make sure that they are abundantly clear to you. For a concept to be franchisable, any concept, it has to have 3 attributes. Let me get them up here and we'll talk about them. So the 3 attributes that make any business concept franchisable. Can you, the franchisor, demonstrate that the business is profitable? If you can do that, is that success replicable? Can standard, ordinary people be trained so that they can replicate your success? And then the third piece is you, the franchisor, have to build an infrastructure to support your franchisees. So I'm going to talk about each of these 3 attributes. But the point is, if you have a concept and you think you would like to scale it up, that you'd like to grow it, that you'd like to use other people's money, then you need to make your concept franchisable. If you can demonstrate that it's profitable, that that success can be replicated, and you build an infrastructure to support your franchisees, then you have something that is potentially very successful. So let me talk about the 3. The piece about being profitable is really pretty straightforward. I will carry out this part of our conversation in the context of you launching some sort of a restaurant concept. Don't care what it is right now, but you're going to be in the restaurant business. And so you open a store anywhere. You open a store in Savannah, Atlanta, Millen, doesn't really matter. You open a store somewhere and you reach the point where you can operate that store profitably. Well, I get that. But your concept isn't franchisable unless you can demonstrate to me that I can achieve the same level of success. So, how can you demonstrate that it's replicable? Well, you simply create a system that supports your franchisees so they can achieve the same sorts of goals. I want to jump ahead to infrastructure because those 2 things are related. Infrastructure says that you, the franchisor, create a system, a structure that supports your franchisees. McDonald's Corporation, the fast food people that are based in Chicago, have at their corporate headquarters in Chicago, I've visited there, it's in a town called Oak something, Oak Brook, Oak Leak, Oak Branch, Oak something or other. They have in their corporate headquarters in Chicago, a suburb of Chicago, a facility that they call McDonald's University. And it's basically a functioning McDonald's store, restaurant. And if you wish to be a franchisee for McDonald's, you go to whatever this Oak something suburb is of Chicago, and you spend 5 weeks working in that store like a crazy person. You will clean toilets, you will cook French fries, you will take care of the dining room, the drive-through, whatever needs to be done. You'll learn how to make payroll, how to properly reorder foodstuffs and the other sorts of paper products and things like that that you need. McDonald's has this 5-week immersion in you running a store. And when you finish that training, you are uncommonly well trained to go open your own place. So that's part. Now, replicable means other things as well. You have to create a brand, you have to support it with advertising, you have to do an awful lot of things. But when I raise this question about how can you demonstrate that success is replicated, the first thing is you need to be able to train people. Does that make sense? And sometimes you help them with other things, and we'll talk about other things in the infrastructure stuff. But if you build a system that permits standard, ordinary people to replicate your success, then you have the second leg of the stool in place. So, in my restaurant concept idea, we've opened a store somewhere, we've proved that it's profitable. I start to work on a system that would permit you, a potential franchisee, to enjoy the same kind of profitability and success that I've had. And then we come down to this infrastructure thing, and part of that is training. So infrastructure says that it's on you, the entrepreneur, you, the franchisor, to build a system that supports your franchisees. And I'll stick with McDonald's for just a moment because I started that, and I'll ride the pony a little bit farther down the trail. The training that they offer for franchisees is just magnificent on every dimension. They help franchisees with site selection because they have traffic studies and they know what competitive pressures are from other restaurants and things like that. They can literally get you linked in with people who will help equip your store with all the restaurant equipment you need, especially the kitchen stuff. One of the things that McDonald's does to this sort of an infrastructure thing is, excuse me. All the franchisees, once their stores are open and running, pay, if I recall correctly, 2 different royalties to corporate. They pay a 5% royalty of all of their sales, which just goes to corporate, and corporate spends it to however it wishes. Then separately, they pay a 3% royalty on sales, which, yes, aggregates to 8%, but they pay a 3% royalty, and that goes in a dedicated account for regional and national advertising. So if they buy television ads for sporting events, NASCAR, NFL, whatever the case may be, then I've seen billboards. Haven't you seen billboards? You know, I'm loving it, $2 stuff. Sometimes those things prompt us to pull in right away and make a purchase, but more typically, we just have this awareness, this state of mind thing. You know, yes, McDonald's is out there, and if on an interstate, it's at the next exit, and they can accommodate buses or tractor trailers or whatever the case may be. So this thing about building a brand, advertising is huge. Everybody does it to some degree, but some people are much more successful than others. So if you think about the infrastructure piece, just those things that I'm sharing with you, McDonald's helps with site selection. They train you to effectively run a store. They help you equip a restaurant. Excuse me. They support you with advertising, both nationally and regionally, so people know about promotional things, and they always have Mickey D sort of top of mind. So I'm really at the end of the trail on this thing about what makes a concept franchisable. If you can open a business and operate it profitably, and then you can demonstrate to me or any potential franchisee that I can achieve the same level of success that you have, and then you build an infrastructure that supports all of us, then you have arguably a concept that is franchisable, and it could be brilliantly successful. My goodness, I mean, you could have literally thousands of stores. I don't keep track, I don't study the fast food industry, but I lived in Louisville for about 10 years, and Yum Brands has its corporate headquarters there. Yum Brands used to be, it actually started as part of PepsiCo for, gosh, decades, probably 2 decades. Pepsi owned Pizza Hut, Taco Bell, and who was the third one? I guess it was KFC. They owned those three. And they probably had 15,000 stores, and all they really wanted to do was sell Pepsi products. So they spun off these three fast food chains, at the time, maybe 15,000 stores, in a company called Tricon, and they changed the name a couple of years later to Yum Brands. You got to give it up. Yum, pretty darn clever, Yum Brands. And then they've expanded. They've added A&W Root Beer and one of the fish places like Long John Silver's or somebody like that. So across these 5 franchise operations, Yum Brand has something like 35 or 40,000 stores worldwide. So my point is that growth can be almost limitless, but you don't have to grow to that stage. Look at how successful Daylight Donuts is, and they only have 800 stores. Yes, you gotta love Daylight Donuts. So, critically important that I share with you what makes a concept rather franchisable. And some of you, if indeed you become entrepreneurs, you may want to build a concept around that model, purposefully design it and build it so that you could franchise it. Now I want to talk about the second big concept in here. If my notes are right, starts on page 258, and the authors talk about a primary target audience, and I think that has enormous significance. The primary target audience would be those people who buy your stuff. Primary target audience. And they talk about 3 things that would describe or define your primary target audience. They talk about demographics and psychographics and then geographic pieces. Now, I want to start in reverse order. Let's start with geographic. If I am in Minnesota and I want to start a business that sells snowmobiles, I would probably be pretty successful because that region of the country would support the sale and service of snowmobiles. If I were on the Grand Strand in South Carolina, somewhere around Myrtle Beach, I'm thinking a snowmobile store would be not a good choice. So clearly, geographics has implications, not just on what you sell, but to whom you sell it. So you can't really ignore that. I may come back to that, but geographics is just like a blunt instrument. It truly is. On the demographic side, we know fundamentally demographics are just things that describe people. And you and I can be categorized so many different ways. We can be categorized on age, on family composition, on religion, on levels of education, on levels of income. So demographics just capture a wide set of attributes of any group of people. And enormous implications there. Once again, I'm going to make this crude. When I say crude, very, very rough cut stuff. But in the last maybe 20, 25 years, Phoenix, Arizona has become an incredibly well thought of place for retirement. Relatively little crime, crazy good weather, modest real estate prices. It's just very attractive to an awful lot of people. So in the last 25 years or so, the population in Phoenix, I think, has been skewed towards people who are of retirement age. So I'm going to say something that I don't really know is true. Let's assume the average age in Phoenix is 72. That's probably goofy. But because it's a very large retirement community, it would certainly be considerably higher than wherever you go on spring break. So if Phoenix is populated by people who are retirees, wouldn't that have implications for what you would sell in that market? I'm thinking they don't need a lot of minivans, but they may buy a lot of 7 Series BMWs or something like that. They may buy luxury cars because they don't need the family transport stuff. I'm thinking that you could not successfully open a store that sells baby furniture in Phoenix, simply because that doesn't appeal to the people who live there. So my point is that the demographics drive the bus in so many ways. And if you have a reasonable fix on the demographics of your target audience, then you can respond to their needs, to their likely needs. The third piece of this, when it talks about your target audience, they talk about psychographics. And in reality, loved ones, I am really ill-equipped to talk about psychographics. I'm actually not sure who would be, because it essentially says, what in my psychology drives my purchasing behavior? I don't think that that's easy to discern no matter who you are. For example, I would tell you that I don't know why, but I like blue cars. Yes, I have no explanation for that. But that's part of the psychographic makeup of me. I have for some reason that I don't understand, I have a preference, a bias to buy blue cars. That isn't true of trucks. But if I were going to buy a sedan, I like the color blue, actually in a lot of different forms. So I'm not really equipped to talk about psychographics, and I don't know who would be. Because again, you're talking about what's going on in my mind individually. That of course is multiplied by the 350 million of us in this country. And it's certainly difficult to discern. And if you can't really understand it, it's hard to respond to it. But I can't change the fact that we are all human beings who behave in ways that are literally not irrational, but unpredictable. And that's probably a good way of starting with it. But when you talk about this primary target audience, the single biggest concern that they raise in the text, and this is something that just throws a powerful punch. How do you reach that target audience? How do you address them? For example, if I were going to sell anything to people in the age cohort of say 20 to 30, let's just take that 10-year age cohort, I can promise you I'd have a significant presence on social media, wouldn't I? Because whether business is done on social media or not is irrelevant. A lot of information is distributed, disseminated on social media. I would have a significant presence there. I would have fresh content, updates, I'd be responsive to people's concerns. If I had a business and I were selling to a youthful group of people from early 20s to early 30s, I promise you I'd have a significant presence on social media, because that's one way to address them. How about the Bill Nortons of the world? Well, I like to read. So I'm perfectly content reading stuff in the Wall Street Journal and in a variety of magazines and things like that. So I like print media. And you'd be very successful reaching to me if you put ads in the magazines that I read, or the journals, or the newspapers, or whatever the case may be. So, and I know that I'm oversimplifying this because I'm just talking about print media versus social media. But the point is, how do you address an audience? If you have some target group that you want to sell to, how do you address them? How do you get your stuff in front of them? Not even at a point where they have to be actionable, where they have to run out and buy it. But how about just awareness? How do you address your target audience? Clearly, advertising, direct marketing, who knows? Events that you host. Red Bull hosts all kinds of sporting events where they sell their stuff. And I mean, when I say they host, they do air races and cliff diving and a lot of things like that. By the way, I'm really kind of thankful that IOC pushed the Tokyo Olympics off to summer 21. That gives me another year or so to train. I haven't picked an event yet, but I will probably try to train and qualify for the 2021 Olympics in Tokyo. Yes, probably will do that. So, this is another crazy easy day in terms of content. And I'm ready to close this video session, but it's time now for me to ask you the question that you and I will use to verify your attendance. What three attributes do the citizens of Israel look for in a candidate for prime minister? What three attributes do they use to evaluate candidates for prime minister long before they vote? So we're done for the day. Again, this is session 25 in the syllabus, chapter 11. And love you, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.